Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome to this year's first episode of On the Middle East. My name is Ambryn Zaman, and my guest today is Elizabeth Tsurkov, a leading scholar on the Levant. Elizabeth and I will be discussing Israel's strategy in Syria and how it fits into a broader pattern of Israeli muscle flexing in the wake of the October 7 attack by Hamas in 2023. Does Israel want Syria's new president Ahmed al-Shara to fail, or is it ready to cut a deal with him? Is Israel's hostility to Turkey likely to escalate into open confrontation in Syria? For all that and more, tune into my conversation with Elizabeth. So welcome to our program, dearest Elizabeth. It's so good to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Amberine, for really everything that you've done and written while I was in captivity. I really appreciate it for keeping my case alive. You're one of the first people my family mentioned to me who was always on my case, always writing about it. So thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, not at all. And we're just so delighted that you've bounced back so fast and, writing all this amazing stuff as usual. And of course, you're a big Syria expert, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And here I am in Paris while Israel's, Syria envoy, the ambassador to Washington, is sitting with Syria's foreign minister, trying to figure out a way to sort of fix their problems. Now, do you think they can, Elizabeth? What exactly is Israel after? I mean, we know what they want on paper, and it's quite a lot, frankly. But what is Israel's real sort of end game here?
Yeah, so I think that the it's hard to even call what is happening in Syria with Israeli conduct as a policy. This policy implies something maybe organized and a strategy behind it, but I would use the word policy because there isn't an alternative to it. Basically, the Israeli conduct in Syria is very much driven by the trauma of October 7th. So even though at the time of Assad's fall, Israeli intelligence stated we have absolutely no information about any threats emanating from Syria, any intention to approach the borders, any intention to carry out attacks in the Golan. Still, Israel, invaded, and soldiers who've been interviewed, in Israeli media, and the Israeli media narrative and the official narrative is that we're doing it in part to prevent another October 7th, basically having an Islamist force on the border that may invade us at any moment and slaughter people, kidnap people. Even though, as I've said, there's absolutely no indication that this is going to happen. So after the fall of the Assad regime, the Israeli outlook towards Damascus was extremely negative, based both on the jihadist history of the group that is now ruling Syria, and also because of the perception that it is essentially a tool of Turkey. So in a sense, this belief that previously there was a regime backed by Iran, which is an enemy of Israel, and now there is a regime backed by Turkey that is an adversary of Israel's. And I hope we get a chance to go into it. I don't think that this perception of HTS, of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the ruling group that took power from Assad, as a proxy of Turkey or as a tool of Turkey is correct. The relationship historically and till this day is actually very fraught and complicated, but this is the dominant perception in Israel. So Therefore, if the power in Damascus is seen as dangerous and hostile, the aim of Israel's policy is to ensure that it is weak. And this is by trying to convince the Trump administration to maintain sanctions in place that will prevent any reconstruction of Syria, and also by supporting the Druze, by supporting the SDF, trying to basically ensure that the center is very weak. And Israeli officials have publicly stated that they want to see a federal Syria with a weak central government. This is something that the foreign minister, Gideon Saar, has stated explicitly and openly. So this was the policy, if we can call it a policy. Then, when the Trump administration changed course with regards to Syria, Trump met the Shara, decided to lift the sanctions, Israel was kind of forced into a negotiating path with Damascus, because Damascus repeatedly expressed interest from the very first month after the fall of Assad in the future normalizing relations with Israel and with peaceful relations with Israel. And this is something that Trump is very interested in, expanding the Abraham Accords. Basically, Israel was pushed into this path. And through the negotiations process, Israel realized that the people they're facing are not these insane jihadists. It's not the Taliban 2.0. It is something quite different, highly pragmatic leadership. So there was progress in the talks. There were leaks to the media that, things are going well, that this guy is not, necessarily as we perceived him to be, etc. And that, establishing relations with Damascus would be beneficial to reducing its reliance on Turkey and taking it out of this Muslim Brotherhood, axis with Qatar and Turkey as the other nodes. But then the Swida massacres happened. In July of last year, regime forces invaded Sweda. Additionally, Bedouin militias invaded, slaughtered Druze. This was a disaster politically for Netanyahu domestically in Israel, because he was perceived, and this is what commentators and studios were saying, that he was naive, that he fell for the lie of El Jolani, the jihadist in the suit or the terrorist in the suit. And since that point forward, Israel has kept trying to basically prevent any agreement from going through, despite pressure from the Trump administration.
When you say
So adding
prevent
new
any
conditions
agreement, sorry to interrupt, but you mean an agreement between itself and
and Damascus.
Damascus. So
Exactly,
are
a
you
security
saying that
deal that
they're negotiating in bad faith, that what's happening now in Paris is sort of a parody just to shut up the Trump administration?
I don't think that it's necessarily a parody, but I think that basically this path of negotiations has been forced on Israel. And the desire of the political leadership is to not reach a deal, is to basically maintain the status quo of Israeli forces continuing to occupy southern Syria, continue to bomb Syria whenever they wish to do so, providing support for the Druze, keeping Damascus weak and unstable. Because the Trump administration is applying pressure, Israel has engaged in negotiations, but it has repeatedly, and we've seen this clearly, particularly since the massacres in Sweda, added all sorts of demands to basically prevent a deal from happening. So, for example, before the UNGA meeting in New York in September, there was great pressure from the Trump administration on Israel and Syria to reach a deal. And there was hope to announce it while both Ashara and Netanyahu are in New York. And Israel re-added a demand that Damascus and Barak, the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, have previously rejected, which is a safe passage, from the Golan to Sweda. Basically, something that would be without any control of Damascus. Through it, they could enter weapons, they could bring anything. And this is something that was inserted purposefully to foil an agreement. This, I think, attitude persisted until I would say last month, pretty much, when Israeli forces entered the town of Bet Jin in the occupied, southern part of Syria. to carry out an arrest, they say, of two members of Jama'a Islamiyah, which is a Hamas-linked group. And basically fire was opened on them from residents of the town. Israel ended up committing a massacre there. 13 people were killed. And as a result, the Trump administration intervened forcefully. Trump personally tweeted about it and also spoke to Netanyahu about it, that you need to be reaching a deal. So it is quite possible that the negotiations that are taking place now will be serious because of this pressure, not because of the genuine change in attitude of the Israeli leadership. The Israeli leadership, unless pressured, will not reach this deal ever, no matter what Damascus gives it. Damascus can agree to all sorts of things, and it has agreed to, removing most forces from the south, etc. This will not satisfy Israeli demands. Israel will continue raising demands to prevent it from happening. But with American pressure, it will reach a deal.
Well, the thing is, I would say that a test of how far Israel can sort of push its own agenda was the Caesar Sanction Act, and the fact that we all know, as you said, Israel did not want those sanctions lifted, least of all if they were not coming with strings attached, the lifting of the sanctions. And that happened despite all the best efforts of Israel and its associated lobbies. So in that sense, perhaps, as you say, the pressure will prove too much and they will have to do a deal. But what would that mean in turn for the Druze and for the Kurds? Let's start with the Druze. I mean, how much of Israeli interest in the Druze is genuinely related to the welfare of its own Druze community? Do those people put a lot of pressure on the Israeli government to defend their brethren? Because it is a bit complicated, right? Because not all Druze in Israel are happy that they are in Israel and don't necessarily recognize Israeli authority over them. So could you unpack that for us, please, Elizabeth, a bit?
Yeah, so I think this is really a great question, and there are many misconceptions about it. There's a commonly held belief that, given the fact that Israel has killed over 60,000 Arabs in Gaza, at the very least, there's no way that it cares about another Arab group in Syria, that it devalues the lives of Palestinians and of Lebanese and other Syrians, right, on the border in the Sunni areas. Why that this, supposed regard for the life of Druze is basically just an excuse to intervene. I think that this is incorrect because there is genuine compassion and support for the Druze in Israel. First of all, the Druze in Israel do not really claim to be Muslim. So they're seen differently from Muslims. They serve in the IDF. They vote for Zionist parties. The people you mentioned who don't accept Israeli authority over them are much more the Druze in the Golan, who have
That's who I
rejected that.
meant.
And actually, they, particularly over the past year, have been applying for citizenship in much greater number. There is the expectation in the Israeli Ministry of Interior that by the end of 2026, the majority of Druze in the Golan will have gotten citizenship. Because of what's happening in Syria, there's basically an understanding that it is not safe for them to live under Syrian control. That is their perception. So the Druze are definitely in Israel second-class citizens. This is legally defined in Israel. However, they are not seen as Muslim Arabs, for example, as the people of Gaza. Particularly the men are fully integrated in Israeli society. They serve in very high numbers in the IDF, in the professional corps, so they continue their military service as a career. There are entire villages of Druze where all the men serve either in the police or in the military. They speak Hebrew fluently without any accent, and therefore they are seen differently. And they have immense effect over decision-making of the IDF, because there are multiple Druze in high position in the military, in all branches of the military. who influenced decision making there. And we saw it very, very clearly during the time of the civil war in Syria. During that time, the village of Hadar, which is located right across from Majd al-Shams, so it is right across the fence that divides the Golan, that Druze village became a hotbed for Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah activity. Samir Kuntar, who was assassinated by Israel, he's a Lebanese militant of Druze origin. Um, his base was there. Hadar was the origin of multiple attacks against IDF forces in the Golan. They would plant explosive devices to harm Israeli soldiers. Yet Israel never bombed Hadar. Not only that, it conditioned the support that it gave to Sunni rebels in the area on not harming Hadar. So even though it contradicted Israeli security interests, this was a habit of Hezbollah. If it had been, theoretically, right, a Sunni village or a Shia village, Israel would have wiped it out. Because it was Druze, they kept it protected. So Druze do have an influence over decision making of the Israeli military, and we saw it play out in Sweda. Of course, there were other motivations for intervening in Sweda. There was, domestically, this was a huge hit for Netanyahu. He needed to show resolve, show I'm not a sucker, I'm not an idiot who, gets tricked by this jihadist in the suit. Also, there was, kind of a matter of Israel set a red line of forces of the military would not be allowed to amass in large numbers in the south, and suddenly Damascus is sending all these forces to Sweda in an area that Israel, set the red line that they shouldn't be there. Of course, we can say this is not a legitimate demand. This is a military operating in its own soil, but Israel, post October 7th, post the victories against the Iranian Axis, is in this kind of very kind of mode of supremacy, a sense that everyone must obey us. So this act of disobedience needs to be punished severely. In addition to the overall overarching goal of Israel since the fall of the Assad regime, which is to keep Damascus weak. So this is why you go and bomb Damascus, to destabilize and weaken it and humiliate it.
So what would an agreement that both sides could accept look like, and including the Druze? Let me not say both sides, but everybody.
Yeah. For Israel, it is absolutely crucial in this agreement to guarantee the security of the Druze. And according to different reporting on the negotiations, it will include essentially limitations on what forces Damascus can deploy in the south, including in Sweda. So basically, internal security in Sweda will remain in Druze hands to prevent what we saw in July. Basically, the moment the forces of the government entered, massacres occurred. And this is a way to basically guarantee their security. However, what the Druze leadership in Syria is demanding, Sheikh al-Hijri and others around them, and many of the majority, I would say, of the Druze community in Sweden after what happened, after the massacres, of kind of a Druze statelet, semi-independent, an entity that is somehow linked to Israel. This is utterly unrealistic, and Israel does not support it.
So, Elizabeth, what you just said is incredibly important, because if that's what an agreement hinges on, and let's say that Shara agrees to this because he's basically forced to, then that really sets the bar pretty high for the Kurds as well, doesn't it? And that could explain why they're dragging their feet on any kind of agreement. They want to see what happens with the Druze first. Does that make sense to you? And how far would Israel stick its neck out for the Kurds? Because we hear a lot of rhetoric coming out of Israel in favor of the Kurds, and often it seems to me it's partly to poke Turkey in the eye. But what do you think it's about? Is there also a genuine love for the Kurds and strategic interest in the Kurds that drives Israeli rhetoric?
Yeah, so I would say with regards to this, main sticking points now, it's basically an agreement was pretty much ready before the Sweda massacres. Now, basically what has prevented it from taking place is the desire of Israel to not reach an agreement. So it reintroduces demands, for example, to maintain a full occupation of the South with an agreement. So basically only withdraw from the South once full normalization and peace agreement is reached, not just the security deal. But after the massacre in Beijing, after the call between Trump and Netanyahu changed his tune and is now only speaking about the demilitarized area in the south, as opposed to maintaining Israeli troops inside the south. With regards to the Kurds, from my understanding, also based on sources, Kurdish sources, there is this belief that Israel will come to their rescue if Damascus invades, basically. I don't think that is necessarily true, because there are no, the Druze are a constituency, an important political and military security constituency inside Israel. The Kurds are not. I, for example, participated in protests that were for, after the Yazidi genocide, and there were members of the Kurdish community, Israeli Jews who participated. There were very, very few of us. It's not a major force, as opposed to the Druze, who really can fill out, squares and also have this influence inside the security establishment. It is quite possible that the SDF is dragging its feet to wait and see what happens with the Druze, what kind of security guarantees Israel will ensure for the Druze. I think you would know better why there is this attitude from the SDF of really kind of going for a rather maximalist position in terms of desire for federalism in a model that is quite close to the KRG, as opposed to the model that Damascus is advocating for, which is, or has accepted, I wouldn't say advocated, but has accepted, which is more, integration, where Damascus does have control. So it's kind of a joint control, a mixture of units, mixtures of commanders to these units, integration of SDF units as one into the military. So not as soldiers, individual soldiers, as Damascus initially demanded. So this would kind of follow the model that was implemented across Syria for the Sunni factions. They were integrated as blocks as opposed to individual soldiers in the overwhelming majority of cases. But the SDF has not accepted this.
But there's also the whole issue of the SDF it basically saying they want a package deal rather than doing things incrementally. They want to be assured that, all the boxes are ticked in terms of their demands before they take any steps. So there's a huge amount of distrust, obviously, and it doesn't look like things are moving terribly fast. And at the same time, of course, you see the SDF flirting with the Druze, the Alawites, and but is Israel encouraging that?
That's a good question. And I genuinely don't know. There isn't information that is out there that is proving this. There have been historical ties between Israel and not just the SDF before the existence of the SDF. So basically ties with the Peyada and Yepege that date back to the early years of the Syrian civil war. Clearly, the SDF served as a channel to provide assist. So basically, Israel delivered money to the SDF. The SDF then sent it to Hijri's forces in Sweda. So there is ongoing contact, obviously, highly secretive, likely managed by the Mossad.
But why can't Israel send that money itself directly? I mean, they share a common border. That's a question that keeps popping up.
They don't with Sweda. They share it with the Druze of Hadar, for example, and Israel is providing assistance there directly, but not with Sweda. And the border with Jordan is locked. Jordan refuses, this kind of an idea of a Druze entity on its border and wants it to reintegrate back into the Damascus's fold.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al-Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al-Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.
To get back to Turkey, which you cited as one big reason driving Israeli policy in Syria, I'm frankly shocked by how much animosity is expressed, and I find it terribly alarming. I mean, there was for a long time, rather, I thought this is just rhetoric. It's just both sides speaking to their own domestic audiences, and it's useful to divert attention away from real problems. But it's beginning to look like it's pretty real. What do you think, Elizabeth? I mean, why is there so much animosity between Turkey and Israel?
I think with regards to Turkey, you're the expert on this. It seems to me that there is this element of domestic politics, right? Because the issue of Palestine matters actually to Turks. In Israel, it's not so much a matter of rallying up, public opinion. It's not a matter that is really animates Israeli public. It is a matter more inside the security establishment and people like researchers, commentators who care about such things, experts in the field. And there, I think that Israel in general, the security establishment is built on identifying threats. And therefore, in Syria, immediately when the regime collapsed, there was the sense not, oh, wow, maybe there's an opportunity here. Right away, there's a search, for the new enemy, the new threat, because this is what intelligence agencies are supposed to do. They're looking out for threats, what to prevent, what to deter, etc. And right away, there was this, in addition to this, and this is something that was reported in Israeli media right as the regime was collapsing and HTS was advancing, is that Israel really has a paucity of intelligence about HTS. Because HTS was not present on the border with Israel since 2018, it is based over there in Idlib. It is rather irrelevant for Israeli security interests. And Israeli intelligence agencies have limited resources. They need to prioritize what they're focusing on. So they focus overwhelmingly on Hezbollah, on Iran, and they don't focus on this group that is, controlling a tiny territory northwest of the country that is irrelevant to Israel in any way. So therefore, the dynamics that occurred during their time in power in Idlib, the tensions with Turkey, the fact, for example, that HTS twice invaded Afrin,
Yes.
which is occupied by Turkish proxies against the will of Turkey,
Yes.
causing really severe tension with Turkey. All of this, I don't think, is something that's registered inside the Israeli system. And therefore, suddenly you see this advance happening, and you're thinking, what is this? There must be, some power behind it. And Turkey, even though it opposed the march toward the south, it opposed the operation by HTS and actively discouraged its proxy militias, the so-called Syrian National Army, from participating in this offensive, instead telling them go fight the Kurds, instead go fight the SDF in Manbij and kick them out of Manbij. Despite this, Turkey is seen among many, not just in Israel, as kind of the sponsor, the patron of Damascus, the puppet master that is behind this, surprise fall of a regime within 11 days. And this also goes back to Israel not really researching the state of the Syrian military, because it has never been a threat to Israel. So why research the fact that soldiers are going hungry, that they have absolutely no morale, that they're, avoiding service in large numbers, they're going home on vacation and they're not returning, their officers are abusing them and extorting money from them, so they have no motivation to fight, and the moment they have an opportunity to not fight and escape, they will do it, So all of this was not of interest to Israel, and therefore the dynamics of what really happened and Turkey's role and relationship with the HTS is something that is very misunderstood in Israel, and I think also on an international scale.
So it's been a year since this new government has been in power. What's your assessment of how Shara has handled things so far? And do you believe that he will survive for the foreseeable future?
Well, I mean, with regards to my assessment, I would say they've had immense success internationally, really beyond their own wildest dreams. You may remember that at first, when they just, came to Damascus, they put up this Prime Minister, Mohammed Bashir, who, this kind of bureaucrat, who I think is now the Minister of Oil. But the first government, he was the Prime Minister. And he started giving interviews, and Ashara was kind of behind the scenes. I think their thinking is that, many powers will refuse to meet with Ashara because it's a prescribed terrorist. And therefore, we need to have this puppet who will do much of this front-facing work, and then they realized, oh, wait, it's not necessary, So they just, he just disappeared into the wilderness, and Ashara started taking the meetings, started speaking publicly. And then, now they appointed him president without even having any prime minister. They eliminated the role to concentrate more power in his hands. So internationally, they've had immense success. Of course, what Syrians are hoping for, and this is what I'm hearing from people across the country, is for reconstruction. The economy is in a terrible situation, and you have written about it as well. The poorest of the poor, which are the majority of Syrians, 90% of Syrians are below the poverty line, are really, really struggling to just feed themselves. Among the Sunni majority, Sunni Arab majority, there is an immense sense of relief and joy, and they used to constantly be afraid of getting kidnapped at a checkpoint, ending up in the mukhabarat and tortured to death. So for them, this is a huge relief. But they're constantly comparing, their current state to that of the Assad regime. As time passes by, they're going to stop making that comparison and going to compare, my situation now to a year ago, right? And their really reconstruction jobs, all of this is very, very necessary. And on that front, there has been some progress, but it is very limited in the sense that of what Syrians on the ground feel. There have been many projects signed, but very little has been implemented on the ground.
And in that sense, would you say that regaining control over the north and east, where all the oil is, the main agricultural land, hydroelectric power is a critical component of rebuilding the economy? And if so, to what extent, lengths would Shara go to reclaim it, in your view? Last question.
Yeah. So it's definitely important. I think there's also, symbolic importance to it of regaining, control over all of Syria's territory. In addition to the fact that, the Arabs in SDF areas are very unhappy about, continuing to remain under SDF rule, and people who are displaced from these areas want to return. So they stage protests, in Damascus on a weekly basis, demanding to be able to return to their homes. So there's also this element. I think that with regard, Syria was never a rich or country, in terms of oil or gas. So it's definitely going to help, but I wouldn't say that this is the key. The key really is foreign financing. And for that, Syria needs stability and security. And this is why I think Damascus has hesitated significantly about using military force with the Kurds, because it will be ferocious fighting. They went into Sueda expecting it to be a cakewalk. They went to Hijri's home, forced him to record a statement saying, to the Druze, hand over your weapons to the government. They didn't expect what happened to unfold. They didn't expect, the massacres to take place, for, soldiers to start running around looting while being filmed and filming themselves and then uploading it to social media and embarrassing them, So, but when going into, so they expected to take basically Sweda without a fight, or with very, very minimal fighting, because at the time the forces that were aligned with Al-Hijri were quite limited. Then after the massacre, everything changed, and now the militias, the Druze factions that existed in Sweda overwhelmingly aligned themselves with Al-Hijri, with a few exceptions. And SDF areas, it will be utterly different, right? They have a very well-organized, trained force with quite advanced weaponry by Syrian standards. It will actually be a serious fight. And this is why they've been avoiding it and trying to reach an agreement. And Damascus has shifted its position with regards, initially it was demanding something very maximalist that was not even applied to Sunni factions of, basically the Kurds and others can join as soldiers. You're welcome, but we're not going to integrate the SDF essentially as blocks. They've given up on that. They've adopted a more pragmatic position. The problem is really that I think that the SDF is hoping really for this kind of KRG model of self-governance in a way, with kind of shows of Syrian unity, but in reality maintaining control. And this is why talks have really not advanced. And despite this, Damascus has not really resorted to the forceful solution, because I think they recognize it will be a disaster and will be very, very damaging to the priority of this regime, which is reconstruction, stabilization of the economy, improving the economic situation. That is their
so the
top priority.
status quo is likely to persist for some time.
Yes, but of course, in war, there are always miscalculations that can lead to all sorts of things. Like we've seen this, someone can shoot and kill, and then things can heat up. And we also, and this again is something that I defer to you on this, Turkey's position. From my understanding from sources in Damascus, inside the government, Turkey wants a more hardline approach towards the SDF, while the Syrian regime is resistant, is not interested in a military escalation. So Turkey could also play kind of is playing an agitator role, could do that to greater effect, create all sorts of provocations. There are forces that are now officially under Damascus's control, but for many years were essentially Turkey's proxies. It still has influence over them. So this, unless if the current situation changes, it remains the same. Yes, we will maintain the status quo, but at any moment, things could change due to some provocation or due to some decision by Turkey to really, this is enough. We want this solved somehow, and then try to stir things up.
So much more to discuss, Elizabeth, but you are very busy. Everybody wants a piece of your flesh, as it were. So I'm not going to monopolize you any further. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And we hope to have many, many, many more conversations with you now that you're free.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amberine.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of On the Middle East. I hope you enjoyed the show and look forward to bringing you more interesting guests. In the meantime, go to our website, www.al-monitor.com, for in-depth and independent coverage of the Middle East. Thank you and goodbye.